David sat alone in the corner of the employee break room, the same spot he occupied every single day at exactly noon. His hands trembled slightly as he carefully opened a worn plastic container, revealing what appeared to be plain white rice and a small portion of overcooked vegetables. Across the room, Cassandra Wells, the razor-sharp chief operating officer of Hartwell Industries, wrinkled her nose as she passed by with a catered Mediterranean salad. Still eating like a college student. David, she said loud enough for the other employees to hear. You'd think someone working here for 5 years could afford better than leftovers. The room fell silent. David's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, focusing intently on his modest meal as Cassandra's expensive heels clicked away, her laughter echoing down the corridor. Before you continue with this story, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with your friends and family. It really helps us continue bringing you these meaningful stories. Now, let's continue. What Cassandra didn't know was that David had been Employee of the Month 17 times in the past 5 years. She didn't know that he arrived at the office an hour before everyone else and left an hour after most had gone home. She didn't know that his performance reviews were flawless, that his project completion rate was the highest in the company, or that 3 different departments had tried to recruit him with promises of promotions and raises. And she certainly didn't know why his lunch consisted of the same simple, humble portions every single day. Cassandra Wells was a woman who had built a career on numbers, efficiency, and an almost frightening ability to cut costs and maximize profits. At 38, she was the youngest C-suite executive Hartwell Industries had ever appointed. She drove a black Mercedes, wore designer suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and maintained professional distance from everyone beneath her executive level. To her, employees were resources to be optimized, not people to be understood. David Patterson was her opposite in nearly every way. At 32, he had worked his way up from the mailroom to a mid-level analyst position through pure determination and skill. He was quiet, methodical, and unfailingly kind to everyone he encountered. While others competed ruthlessly for promotions, David simply did excellent work and helped anyone who asked. He never spoke about his personal life, never joined the office happy hours, and never, ever complained. This particular Tuesday started like any other. David arrived at 6:30 in the morning, made himself a single cup of coffee from the ancient machine near his desk, and began working through the complex financial models that were his specialty. By the time Cassandra swept through the office at 8:15, he had already completed what would take most analysts half a day. Cassandra barely noticed him, as usual. Her morning was consumed with a crisis in the Denver branch, a conference call with Tokyo that had gone poorly, and the uncomfortable realization that the quarterly numbers were not going to look as good as she had promised the board. By the time noon arrived, she was in a foul mood, which was why her comment about David's lunch was even sharper than usual. What she didn't see was the way David's hand shook after she walked away. She didn't notice the slight moisture in his eyes that he quickly blinked away. She didn't see him carefully return his food to the container, his appetite suddenly gone. And she definitely didn't see him slip a small photograph from his wallet and stare at it for a long, painful moment before returning to his desk without having eaten a single bite. The next day, Cassandra made another comment. "Let me guess, David. Tuesday's leftovers today." She smirked at her own joke, and a few of the junior employees, eager to impress her, laughed along. David simply nodded and said quietly, "Yes, There was no edge to his voice, no resentment, just a simple acknowledgement. This somehow annoyed Cassandra even more. She was accustomed to reactions. Her sharp words usually provoked fear, anger, or groveling apologies. David's calm acceptance felt almost like defiance. "You know, the company cafeteria offers subsidized meals," she continued, unable to let it go. "You could at least pretend to have some professional standards." This time, something flickered across David's face. Not anger, but something deeper. Sadness, perhaps, or maybe exhaustion. "I appreciate the advice, Ms. Wells," he said softly, then returned his attention to his container of plain pasta and steamed broccoli. Over the following weeks, Cassandra's comments became a pattern. Every few days, she would pass through the break room during lunch, and almost every time, she would make some remark about David's food. "Living the frugal life, I see. Still can't spring for takeout. That's just sad, David." The other employees began to anticipate these moments, some watching with uncomfortable sympathy, others with the guilty pleasure people feel when they are not the target of someone powerful. But David never responded beyond basic politeness. He never defended himself, never explained, never showed anger. He simply endured. What none of them knew was what happened when David left the office each day. While Cassandra returned to her luxury apartment downtown, David drove 4 to 5 minutes in the opposite direction to a small, run-down neighborhood on the edge of the city. He parked his 12-year-old Honda Civic outside a modest house that had seen better days, the paint peeling, the small front yard more weeds and grass. Inside, his younger sister Claire waited. Claire was 27 years old and had been living with David for the past 6 years, ever since the accident that had left her paralyzed from the waist down. She had been a dancer, full of dreams and energy, until a drunk driver had shattered her spine and her future in a single terrible moment. The settlement from the lawsuit had been substantial, but medical bills, specialized equipment, and the modifications needed for the house had consumed it faster than anyone had anticipated. David had become her primary caregiver. Every morning before work, he helped Claire with her routine, prepared meals for her day, and made sure everything she needed was within reach. Every evening, he returned to assist with therapy exercises, prepare dinner, and provide the companionship that kept her from sinking into the depression that constantly threatened to overwhelm her. The cost of Claire's care was astronomical. Insurance covered some, but the co-pays, the medications, the specialized physical therapy that offered her the best chance of regaining some mobility, all of it fell on David. He had researched endlessly and found a new treatment program at Johns Hopkins that showed remarkable results for patients with Claire's specific type of injury. The cost was $90,000, not covered by insurance, and classified as experimental. So David saved every penny. He brought leftovers for lunch because it meant the difference between $30 a week and nearly nothing. He drove an old car because a payment on a new one would set back his savings by months. He wore the same 4 dress shirts in rotation because new clothes were an unnecessary expense. He skipped the office social events because even a $20 contribution to a retirement party was $20 that could go toward Claire's treatment. Every 2 weeks, when his paycheck arrived, David deposited most of it directly into a separate savings account he had labeled Claire's Future. He tracked every expense in a detailed spreadsheet, calculated down to the dollar how much he needed and how long it would take. At his current rate, accounting for Claire's ongoing expenses, he would have enough for the Johns Hopkins program in approximately 14 months. 14 months of leftovers. 14 months of no luxuries. 14 months of enduring whatever comments people wanted to make about his choices. Back at the office, Cassandra's awareness of David began to shift, though she didn't fully understand why. She started noticing things she had overlooked before. She noticed that David never missed a deadline, never made excuses, never participated in office politics or gossip. She noticed that junior employees often stopped by his desk for advice and that he always made time for them, even when he was clearly busy. She noticed that the quality of his work was, if she was being honest, extraordinary. One Thursday afternoon, Cassandra was reviewing the quarterly performance metrics when something caught her eye. David Patterson had the highest productivity rating in the entire department, significantly higher than employees who were 2 levels above him in seniority. His error rate was essentially 0. His project completion time was 30% faster than the department average. She pulled up his salary information and was shocked to discover he was making barely more than he had 3 years ago. 2 small cost of living increases, nothing more. No promotions, no bonuses beyond the standard company-wide allocation, nothing that reflected his exceptional performance. Cassandra frowned. This was inefficient. Employees like David were exactly the kind of talent the company should be incentivizing and promoting. Losing him to a competitor would be costly. She made a note to speak with human resources about a raise and possible promotion. It was purely a business decision, she told herself. Nothing to do with any growing discomfort she felt about her lunchtime comments. The next Monday, Cassandra was in the break room making her usual espresso from a machine she had personally funded because a regular coffee was undrinkable. David entered at his customary time, and she found herself watching as he settled into his corner spot. Today's container held white rice and what appeared to be tuna mixed with some kind of vegetable. It looked, Cassandra had to admit, genuinely unappetizing. The words were out of her mouth before she could stop them. David, that cannot possibly be enjoyable to eat. But this time, something was different in her tone. Less mockery, more genuine puzzlement. David looked up at her, and for the first time, he held her gaze for more than a brief moment. "It serves its purpose, Ms. Wells," he said quietly. "Not everything is about enjoyment." There was something in the way he said it, a weight behind the words, that made Cassandra pause. She found herself asking, against her better judgment, "What purpose is that?" David seemed to debate whether to answer. Then, perhaps tired of the months of comments, perhaps simply exhausted from carrying his burden alone, he said, "The purpose of keeping my expenses minimal so I can afford what actually matters." Before Cassandra could respond, another employee entered the break room, and David immediately looked down at his food, clearly ending the conversation. Cassandra returned to her office, but the interaction bothered her in a way she couldn't quite articulate. That evening, she found herself thinking about David instead of reviewing the acquisition proposal that sat on her desk. She realized she knew almost nothing about him. No mentions of family in office conversation, no photos on his desk, no personal details ever shared. For someone who had worked at the company for 5 years, he was remarkably invisible as an individual. The next morning, Cassandra did something she had never done before. She accessed David's personnel file, not to review his performance metrics, but to look at the personal information section. Emergency contact, Claire Patterson, sister. There was an address in a part of town Cassandra had never been to, a neighborhood that didn't appear in any of her usual haunts. She noticed his benefit selections. Maximum health insurance coverage despite the high premium. Enrollment in the company's FSA program with the highest possible contribution. Disability insurance. Life insurance with a maximum payout. These were not the choices of a careless spender. These were the careful decisions of someone planning for serious medical expenses. Cassandra's curiosity deepened into something more serious. She spent her lunch hour that day doing something she would have considered absurd a week earlier. She Googled David's name along with his sister's. What she found made her breath catch. A news article from 6 years ago. Local dancer paralyzed in drunk driving accident. There was a photo of a vibrant young woman in mid-leap, joy radiating from every line of her body. The article described the accident, the driver who had served only 18 months in prison, and the promising dance career that had ended in a single moment. Another article, from a year later, accident victim's brother becomes primary caregiver. A brief mention of David Patterson, who had taken on the care of his younger sister after their parents, unable to handle the emotional and financial strain, had essentially withdrawn from the situation. Cassandra sat back in her chair, feeling something unfamiliar and deeply uncomfortable. Shame. Every snide comment she had made replayed in her mind. Every smake, every casual cruelty delivered for no reason other than that she could, that it made her feel superior, that she had never considered there might be a real person with real struggles behind the quiet man eating leftovers. She thought of her own lunches, her catered meals and expensive take-ate, things she never thought twice about purchasing. She thought of her Mercedes, Her designer wardrobe, her luxury apartment, none of it had required sacrifice. She earned an excellent salary and spent it as she pleased, never having to choose between her own comfort and someone else's life. For the first time in years, Cassandra Wells felt genuinely ashamed of herself. But knowing she had been cruel and knowing what to do about it were different things. Cassandra spent the next several days observing David more carefully. She noticed he worked through lunch at least twice a week, probably to make up for time he needed for other obligations. She noticed the careful, almost meditative way he ate, as though even this simple act required discipline. She noticed that he never, ever wasted a single bite of food. She also began discreetly asking other employees about him. What she learned only deepened her shame. "David? He's the best," said Jennifer from accounting. "He stayed late 3 nights to help me fix an error in my reconciliation. Wouldn't take credit or anything." "That guy is a saint," reported Tom from IT. "He's always patient when he has tech problems, never acts like we're bothering him, even brings us coffee sometimes. He helped train me when I started," offered Sophie, one of the newest analysts. "Spent hours explaining things, made sure I understood. I would have quit in my first month without him." The picture that emerged was of someone Cassandra had completely misjudged. Not lazy, not careless about his career, not lacking in ambition or standards, simply operating with different priorities than she had assumed. Cassandra called human resources and demanded to know why David hadn't been promoted. The answer was bureaucratic and infuriating. He had never applied for posted positions. He had never specifically requested a raise beyond the annual review process. He had never made himself visible to upper management. In the corporate world Cassandra inhabited, quiet competence often went unrewarded. The system promoted those who advocated for themselves, who networked, who made sure the right people knew their value. David did none of these things, so he had been overlooked. "I want him promoted to senior analyst immediately," Cassandra told the HR director. "And I want his salary increased to match that level, retroactive to the beginning of the quarter." "That's highly irregular," the HR director protested. "We have processes." "I don't care," Cassandra said flatly. "His performance justifies it 10 times over. Make it happen by end of week." But even as she pushed through the promotion and raise, Cassandra knew it wasn't enough. It didn't address what she had done. It didn't acknowledge the months of small cruelties. And it didn't truly help with what David was clearly struggling to afford. The following Tuesday, Cassandra did something completely out of character. She waited until she saw David enter break room at noon. Then she followed a few minutes later. He was in his usual spot, opening a container of plain spaghetti with a thin red sauce. "David," she said, her voice different than he had ever heard it. Softer, uncertain. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" He looked up, surprise evident on his face. "Of course, Ms. Wells." She sat down across from him, something she had never done with any employee at his level. For a moment, she didn't speak, apparently gathering her thoughts. "I owe you an apology," she finally said. "Several apologies. Actually, my comment about your lunch, about your choices, they were inappropriate and unkind. I'm sorry." David seemed genuinely shocked. "Ms. Wells, you don't need to—" "Please, let me finish," she interrupted. "I made assumptions about you without knowing anything about your life or your circumstances. That was wrong. More than wrong. It was a kind of behavior I would condemn in others, and I'm ashamed that it came so easily to me." David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, simply, "Thank you. I appreciate that." Cassandra took a breath. "I also want you to know that I've pushed through a promotion for you to senior analyst, with a corresponding salary increase. It's something that should have happened 2 years ago based on your performance. HR will have the paperwork for you by Friday." Now David looked genuinely stunned. "Ms. Wells, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. You've earned it many times over. Cassandra hesitated, then continued. I also wanted you to know that if you ever need any kind of support, professional or otherwise, my door is open. I realize I haven't created an environment where you would feel comfortable approaching me, but I'd like to change that. Something shifted in David's expression. Walls that had been carefully maintained began to crack, just slightly. That's very kind of you, he said quietly. Cassandra left the break room feeling like she had at least begun to make amends. But that night, she couldn't stop thinking about the news article she had read, about Claire Patterson, whose dance career had been stolen from her, about the brother who had quietly taken on the burden of her care, about the enormous cost of medical treatment and how even a good corporate salary could be inadequate in the face of real crisis. An idea began forming in Cassandra's mind. It was complicated, probably overstepping, and would require her to be vulnerable in a way she had spent her entire career avoiding. But something about David's quiet dignity, his refusal to be bitter despite having every reason, made her want to do more than just apologize and arrange a promotion. The next morning, Cassandra called a meeting of the company's senior leadership. I want to propose something, she told the assembled executives. A new employee assistance program, specifically focused on catastrophic family medical situations. She presented a detailed plan she had worked on until 3 a.m, a fund that employees could access when facing extraordinary medical expenses. A matching program where the company would match employee fundraising for colleagues in crisis. A partnership with local hospitals to negotiate better rates for employees' family members. This is a significant expense, the CFO pointed out. Why now? Cassandra met his eyes steadily. Because we have at least one employee, probably more, who is struggling with exactly this kind of situation. And because it's the right thing to do. These people make this company successful. The least we can do is support them when life becomes overwhelming. The proposal passed, though not without significant debate. But Cassandra had never been easily deterred when she decided something was important. With the program approved in principle, Cassandra faced her next challenge: how to help David specifically without making him feel like a charity case. She was increasingly aware that pride might prevent him from accepting direct help, even if he desperately needed it. She found her answer in an unexpected place. One of the articles about Claire's accident had mentioned her dance company, and Cassandra tracked down the artistic director, a woman named Helena Rodriguez. I'm calling about Claire Patterson, Cassandra explained. I work with her brother, and I've learned about her situation. I want to help, but I need to understand more about what she needs. Helena was cautious at first, protective of Claire's privacy. But when Cassandra explained her genuine desire to help, the director opened up. Claire is one of the most talented dancers I ever worked with, Helena said. The accident devastated all of us. David has been incredible, just absolutely devoted to her care. But I know they're trying to raise money for a new treatment program. David set up a small fundraising page about a year ago, but is too proud to really promote it. Cassandra found a fundraising page that night. It was bare bones, just a simple explanation of Claire's situation and the Johns Hopkins program. The goal was $90,000. The current total was $42,318. Every donation was small. $20 here, $50 there, a few $100 contributions. The most recent donation was from 2 months ago. Cassandra looked at the number for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and accessed her personal banking. The next morning, David received an email notification that seemed impossible. A donation of $48,000 to Claire's medical fund. From an anonymous donor. The goal was met. Actually exceeded by a few $100s. David stared at his phone in the parking lot of Hartwell Industries, unable to process what he was seeing. It had to be a mistake. It had to be. His hands shaking, he called the fundraising platform. No, they confirmed it was real, a legitimate donation. They couldn't reveal the donor, but the money was real and would be transferred to his account within 3 business days. David sat in his car and cried, just completely broke down in a way he hadn't allowed himself to do in years. All the pressure, all the careful saving, all the sacrifices, and suddenly, impossibly, Claire could have a treatment. She could have a real chance at regaining mobility, at having a life beyond the limitations of her wheelchair. When he finally composed himself enough to walk into the office, his eyes were still red. Cassandra saw him from her office window as he crossed the parking lot. She saw the way he moved, like someone in shock. She saw him stop halfway to the building entrance and just stand there for a moment, his face turned up to the sky. And she understood that he knew, that he had seen the donation. She had debated with herself about the anonymous aspect. Part of her wanted him to know it was her, wanted him to understand how sorry she was, how much she admired his dedication. But she had ultimately decided that making it about her would be selfish. This wasn't about her redemption. It was about giving Claire a chance and lifting an impossible burden from a good man's shoulders. What Cassandra didn't expect was David appearing at her office door 2 hours later. "Ms. Wells, could I speak with you privately?" His voice was hoarse, his eyes still showing signs of tears. "Of course, David. Come in." Close the door. He stood in front of a desk, visibly struggling with his emotions. "I don't know how to say this. I don't even know if I'm right. But the donation to my sister's fund this morning, the anonymous one, I need to know." Cassandra met his eyes. She had never been good at deception. "What makes you think it was me?" "The timing," he said quietly. "Our conversation yesterday. The promotion. And honestly, I can't think of anyone else who would even know about Claire, much less have a means to." His voice broke. "I'm sorry. I'm barely holding it together right now." "Sit down, David," Cassandra said gently. He did, collapsing into the chair like his legs could no longer support him. Cassandra came around her desk and did something completely unprecedented. She pulled up a chair and sat next to him, not behind the barrier of a desk. "Yes," she admitted, "it was me. And before you say anything, before you try to refuse or insist you can't accept it, please let me explain." David just nodded, incapable of speech. "I was cruel to you," Cassandra began. "For months, I made you the target of my thoughtless comments because I could, because it made me feel superior, because I never once considered that you might be dealing with something difficult. When I learned about Claire, about what you've been doing for her, I was ashamed, deeply ashamed." She paused, making sure he was following. "The promotion and raise, those are things you earned and should have had already. That's a company recognizing your value, which it failed to do before. But the donation, that's personal. That's me trying to do something meaningful to make up for being the kind of person who mocks someone's lunch without knowing they are making that choice so their sister can have medical care." Tears were streaming down David's face now. "I can't accept this. It's too much. It's... David, I looked at my bank account last night. Really looked at it. I have more money than I need or honestly deserve. I spend more on clothes in a month than you were trying to save in a year. And you know what none of my expensive lunches or designer suits have ever done. They've never given anyone a chance to walk again. They've never meant anything beyond my own shallow comfort." Cassandra's own eyes were getting misty now, something she couldn't remember happening in a professional setting ever. "Please let me do this. Let me be part of giving Claire this chance. Let me do something that actually matters." David couldn't speak. He just nodded, then covered his face with his hands and sobbed. Not quiet, restrained tears, but the kind of crying that comes from years of held tension finally releasing. Cassandra did something that would have shocked anyone who knew her. She reached out and put a hand on David's shoulder, offering what comfort she could while this man who had cared so much for so long finally let himself break down. When David finally composed himself, He looked at Cassandra with an expression she would never forget. "Thank you," he managed. "Those words aren't enough. They can't possibly be enough. But thank you. You've given my sister her life back." "You gave her that, David. You've been giving her that every single day for 6 years. I just helped with one piece of it." They talked for a long time after that. David told her about Claire, about the vibrant, joyful person she had been before the accident and the determined, brave person she was now. He told her about the exercises they did every evening, about the small victories like improved sensation in her left leg, about the dreams Claire still held on to despite everything. Cassandra found herself sharing things too, about her own family, distant and dysfunctional, about the loneliness of her single-minded career focus, about the realization that she had confused success with worth. "I've spent years believing that being tough, being hard, being the person who doesn't coddle or sympathize made me a better executive," Cassandra admitted. "But watching you, seeing what real strength looks like, I understand how wrong I was. You've been dealing with something that would crush most people, and you just quietly handled it while still being kind to everyone around you. That's strength. What I was doing was just cruelty." The conversation marked a turning point, not just in their relationship but in Cassandra herself. Over the following weeks, she began to change how she led. She started learning people's names across all levels of the company. She asked about their lives, their families, their challenges. She instituted a medical assistance program with genuine enthusiasm, making sure employees knew it was there for them. She stopped eating lunch alone in her office and started joining groups in the break room, actually talking to people instead of just issuing directives. The transformation didn't go unnoticed. Some of her fellow executives were puzzled. Some were cynical, suggesting it was a phase or a PR move. But the employees noticed, and they responded. Morale improved. Retention numbers got better. People started bringing their discretionary effort, the extra work that can't be mandated, because they felt valued. As for David, the promotion and raise meant he could afford to hire a part-time caregiver for Claire, giving him some breathing room he hadn't had in years. More importantly, Claire began the treatment program at Johns Hopkins. The early results were promising. Not miracles, but genuine, measurable improvement. Feeling in areas that had been numb for 6 years. Muscle response where there had been nothing. Hope, real and tangible, where there had only been grim determination. David began bringing different lunches. Not expensive. He was still careful with money, but more varied, more nutritious. Cassandra noticed but never commented, except once when she said, "That looks good, David. I'm glad you're taking care of yourself." He had smiled. "I can afford to now, thanks to someone's generosity and a raise I apparently should have gotten years ago." "Sit down, David," Cassandra said gently. He did, collapsing into the chair like his legs could no longer support him. Cassandra came around her desk and did something completely unprecedented. She pulled up a chair and sat next to him, not behind the barrier of her desk. "Yes," she admitted, "it was me. And before you say anything, before you try to refuse or insist you can't accept it, please let me explain." David just nodded, incapable of speech. "I was cruel to you," Cassandra began. "For months, I made you the target of my thoughtless comments because I could, because it made me feel superior, because I never once considered that you might be dealing with something difficult. When I learned about Claire, about what you've been doing for her, I was ashamed, deeply ashamed." She paused, making sure he was following. "The promotion and raise, those are things you earned and should have had already. That's a company recognizing your value, which it failed to do before. But the donation, that's personal. That's me trying to do something meaningful to make up for being the kind of person who mocks someone's lunch without knowing they are making that choice so their sister can have medical care." Tears were streaming down David's face now. "I can't accept this. It's too much. It's... David, I looked at my bank account last night. Really looked at it. I have more money than I need or honestly deserve. I spend more on clothes in a month than you were trying to save in a year. And you know what none of my expensive lunches or designer suits have ever done. They've never given anyone a chance to walk again. They've never meant anything beyond my own shallow comfort. Cassandra's own eyes were getting misty now, something she couldn't remember happening in a professional setting ever. Please let me do this. Let me be part of giving Claire this chance. Let me do something that actually matters. David couldn't speak. He just nodded, then covered his face with his hands and sobbed. Not quiet, restrained tears, but the kind of crying that comes from years of held tension finally releasing. Cassandra did something that would have shocked anyone who knew her. She reached out and put a hand on David's shoulder, offering what comfort she could while this man who had cared so much for so long finally let himself break down. When David finally composed himself, he looked at Cassandra with an expression she would never forget. "Thank you," he managed. "Those words aren't enough. They can't possibly be enough. But thank you. You've given my sister her life back. You gave her that, David. You've been giving her that every single day for 6 years. I just helped with one piece of it." They talked for a long time after that. David told her about Claire, about the vibrant, joyful person she had been before the accident and the determined, brave person she was now. He told her about the exercises they did every evening, about the small victories like improved sensation in her left leg, about the dreams Claire still held onto despite everything. Cassandra found herself sharing things too, about her own family, distant and dysfunctional, about the loneliness of a single-minded career focus, about the realization that she had confused success with worth. "I've spent years believing that being tough, being hard, being the person who doesn't coddle or sympathize made me a better executive," Cassandra admitted. "But watching you, seeing what real strength looks like, I understand how wrong I was. You've been dealing with something that would crush most people, and you just quietly handled it while still being kind to everyone around you. That strength. What I was doing was just cruelty." The conversation marked a turning point, not just in their relationship but in Cassandra herself. Over the following weeks, she began to change how she led. She started learning people's names across all levels of the company. She asked about their lives, their families, their challenges. She instituted a medical assistance program with genuine enthusiasm, making sure employees knew it was there for them. She stopped eating lunch alone in her office and started joining groups in the break room, actually talking to people instead of just issuing directives. The transformation didn't go unnoticed. Some of her fellow executives were puzzled. Some were cynical, suggesting it was a phase or a PR move. But the employees noticed, and they responded. Morale improved. Retention numbers got better. People started bringing their discretionary effort, the extra work that can't be mandated, because they felt valued. As for David, the promotion and raise meant he could afford to hire a part-time caregiver for Claire, giving him some breathing room he hadn't had in years. More importantly, Claire began the treatment program at Johns Hopkins. The early results were promising. Not miracles, but genuine, measurable improvement. Feeling in areas that had been numb for 6 years. Muscle response where there had been nothing. Hope, real and tangible, where there had only been grim determination. David began bringing different lunches. Not expensive, he was still careful with money, but more varied, more nutritious. Cassandra noticed but never commented, except once when she said, "That looks good, David. I'm glad you're taking care of yourself." He had smiled. "I can afford to now, thanks to someone's generosity and a raise I apparently should have gotten years ago." Several months after that morning in Cassandra's office, the company held its annual holiday party. For the first time in the 5 years he had worked there, David attended, and he didn't come alone. Claire was with him, in her wheelchair, but sitting up straight, her eyes bright with the kind of energy David had described. Cassandra approached him nervously, unsure of her welcome. "Claire, I'm Cassandra Wells. I've heard so much about you." Claire looked up at this woman her brother had described in his calls, the one whose guilt had transformed into generosity. "Ms. Wells, I've been hoping to meet you. I wanted to thank you personally for what you did." "Please, call me Cassandra, and you don't need to thank me. Honestly, you and David taught me something I desperately needed to learn." "What's that?" Claire asked. that being successful and being good aren't the same thing. I was very successful and not particularly good. You two showed me what really matters. Claire reached out and took Cassandra's hand. David told me about your conversations, about how you've changed the company culture. That's affecting hundreds of people. So, yes, you helped me, and I'll be grateful for that for the rest of my life. But you've helped a lot of other people, too. That matters. The three of them talked for a long time that evening. Cassandra learned about Claire's progress, about the sensation returning to her legs, about the experimental nerve treatments that might, just might, lead to her dancing again in some form. She heard the hope in Claire's voice and saw the pride and love in David's eyes as he watched his sister talk about her future. Later, as the party was winding down, David found Cassandra standing alone by the window, looking out at the city lights. "You know, you never told me why you looked into my life," he said. "Why that particular day, after months of, well, not being kind?" Cassandra was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, I don't have a good answer. Something about the way you responded to me that day. You weren't angry or defensive. You were just patient, like you understood something I didn't. It bothered me enough to look deeper, and what I found broke through walls I'd spent years building." "I'm glad it did," David said simply. "Not just for me and Claire, though obviously I'm grateful beyond words for that, but for you too. The person you are now, the leader you're becoming, that's someone who's going to do a lot of good." "I hope so," Cassandra replied. "I have a lot to make up for." "Maybe," David acknowledged, "but I think you're doing it. One person, one decision, one moment of choosing compassion over efficiency at a time." They stood together in comfortable silence, these two people who had started as antagonists and target and had somehow become something like friends. Outside, the city glittered with a million lights, each one representing lives and struggles and hopes invisible to those who didn't look closely enough. Cassandra thought about all the times she had walked past people, judged them, dismissed them, never considering the depth of their stories. She thought about how close she had come to remaining that person forever, insulated by success and superiority. And she thought about the simple twist of fate that had made her pause, look deeper, and discover not just David's story but her own capacity for change. In the months that followed, Cassandra became something unexpected. A genuinely beloved leader, not feared, not just respected, but actually cared about by the people she led. She used her position to advocate for employees facing hardship. She pushed for better benefits, more flexible working arrangements, and programs that recognize people as humans with complex lives rather than just resources to be optimized. The company's performance didn't suffer. If anything, it improved. Turns out people who feel valued work harder, stay longer, and bring their best selves to their jobs. The board was initially skeptical of Cassandra's transformation, but couldn't argue with results. David continued his steady, excellent work, now properly compensated and recognized. He became a mentor to newer employees, sharing not just technical knowledge but the quiet wisdom that comes from enduring hardship with grace. His story, the broad strokes if not the details, became part of company culture, a reminder that you never really know what someone is dealing with. Claire's recovery continued. She didn't regain full mobility, but she progressed far beyond what her original doctors had thought possible. She started teaching dance to children with disabilities, using a modified chair-based technique she developed. She choreographed pieces that incorporated both standing and seated dancers, creating something entirely new and beautiful from her experience. And Cassandra, in one of her most important decisions, became not just a donor but a friend to both David and Claire. She attended Claire's first showcase of adaptive dance. She celebrated when David finally paid off all of Claire's medical debt. She was there for the hard days, too, when treatments didn't work as hoped or when the frustration of limitations became overwhelming. The relationship changed all of them. David learned that vulnerability could lead to connection, that accepting help wasn't weakness. Claire learned that tragedy could be transformed into purpose, that her experience could help others facing similar challenges. And Cassandra learned the most important lesson of all, that the true measure of a person isn't their title or salary or achievements, but what they do with their resources and power when faced with someone else's need. She learned that kindness isn't weakness, that seeing people as whole humans rather than functions makes you a better leader, not a worse one. She learned that the armor she had worn for so long, the hard shell of professional distance and superiority, had protected her from nothing important while preventing her from experiencing everything that mattered. Years later, when Cassandra was promoted to CEO, her acceptance speech surprised many of the longtime employees and board members. "I want to tell you about someone named David Patterson," she began. "Most of you know him as a senior director now, one of our most valuable team members. But years ago, when he was a mid-level analyst and I was COO, I was cruel to him. Not in any dramatic way, not in any way that would make headlines or get me fired. Just small, casual cruelties. Comments about his lunch. Implications that he didn't meet professional standards. The kind of things that people in power do every day without thinking because there are no consequences." The room was silent, everyone wondering where this was going. I was wrong. And when I finally learned why David made the choices he did, when I learned about his sister and the sacrifice he was making to care for her, I was ashamed. That shame led to curiosity. That curiosity led to understanding. And that understanding changed how I lead, how I see people, how I think about what business is for. Cassandra looked directly at David, who was sitting in the audience looking deeply uncomfortable with being the center of attention. "David, if you had responded to my cruelty with anger, I would have dismissed you. If you had explained and justified yourself, I would have seen it as weakness. But you just quietly continue being excellent, continue being kind, continue doing what mattered regardless of what I said. That dignity, that strength, taught me more than any business school class ever did." She turned back to the assembled crowd. "I'm accepting this position with a commitment that we will be a company that sees our people as people, that will understand that everyone who works here has a life outside these walls, with complexities and challenges and responsibilities we can't see. That our success will be measured not just in quarterly returns, but in the lives we improve and the community we build." The speech became legendary in corporate circles. Some praised it as a new model of conscious leadership. Some cynics dismissed it as performance. But those who worked at Hartwell Industries knew it was real because they lived the results every day. The medical assistance program Cassandra had started helped 43 families in its first 3 years. The company culture shifted from cutthroat to collaborative. Exit interviews showed that people left for opportunities, not to escape toxicity. And at the center of it all, quietly going about his work, was David, never seeking credit, never leveraging his story, just being the same steady, kind, excellent person he had always been. Except now, when noon rolled around, he ate whatever he wanted. Sometimes leftovers, because he actually liked them. Sometimes something more elaborate. Sometimes he skipped lunch to work through a problem. But it was always his choice, made freely, without the weight of impossible burdens on every decision. And sometimes Cassandra would join him in the break room. They'd talk about work, about Claire's latest choreography project, about the challenges of leadership, about nothing in particular. Two people who had found an unexpected friendship in the aftermath of casual cruelty and profound grace. One day, a new employee made a thoughtless comment about another colleague's worn shoes. It was quiet, probably meant as a joke, exactly the kind of thing that gets said in offices everywhere every day. Cassandra overheard it. She walked over to the new employee, her face serious. "Can I speak with you privately for a moment?" In her office, Cassandra didn't yell or threaten. She simply said, "You don't know why someone makes the choices they make. You don't know what they are dealing with, what they're sacrificing, what burdens they carry. Before you judge, before you comment, before you make someone feel small, consider that they might be the strongest person you've ever met, and you just can't see it yet." The employee, chastened and confused, nodded. "I want to tell you a story," Cassandra continued, "about a man who ate leftovers every day while I mocked him for it." She shared the broad strokes, nothing that would violate David's privacy, just enough to make the point. The employee left her office with tears in their eyes and a new understanding. That became part of Cassandra's leadership, too. Every new employee orientation included a session she personally led about seeing the whole person, about kindness as a professional value, about the strength it takes to be vulnerable and the courage it takes to help. Hartwell Industries became known not just as a great place to work, but as a place that changed how people thought about work itself. And it all traced back to a moment when a powerful woman had been cruel, a kind man had endured, and somehow, impossibly, both of them had been transformed. David and Cassandra remained close friends for the rest of their careers. When David finally decided to retire early to spend more time with Claire and her growing adaptive dance program, Cassandra threw him a party that was more emotional than professional. "You saved me," she told him in front of everyone. "I was becoming someone I would have hated, and I didn't even know it. You showed me a different way." "You saved yourself," David replied. "I just ate my lunch. You did the hard work of changing." "Well," Cassandra smiled through tears, "let's agree we saved each other." And perhaps that was the truest answer. Sometimes redemption isn't a solitary journey. Sometimes it takes two people, one willing to be vulnerable and another willing to finally see, to create the kind of transformation that ripples outward and changes everything it touches. The story of David and Cassandra became part of Hartwell Industries' culture, passed down to new employees, adapted and retold, sometimes simplified, sometimes embellished. But at its core, it remained a simple truth that seeing people, really seeing them, can change everything. That casual cruelty has costs we don't calculate. That strength often looks like quiet endurance. And that it's never too late to become someone better than you were yesterday. In the end, Cassandra did stop crying, but not before she had cried enough to wash away the person she had been and become someone new. Someone who understood that leadership without compassion is just management, that success without kindness is just accumulation, and that the most important question we can ask about anyone isn't what they can do for us, but what they might be carrying that we can't see.